The honourable member from Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, in a minority, this Prime Minister says it's the government's obligation to take into account the priorities of the opposition. But he ignores his own advice. He raises taxes, slashes help for the vulnerable, kills the Kyoto Plan, rips billions from childcare, Aboriginal people and training, undermines the Charter of Rights, and snuggles up to extreme Republicans, all contrary to what Canadians want. When will this Prime Minister curtail his belligerence to acknowledge that 65% of Canadians did not vote for him?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, under the heading of cozying up to extreme Republicans, yesterday we learned about the visit of certain Liberals last year to Governor Schwarzenegger, the gubernator in California. But, Mr. Speaker, I find this a bit peculiar coming from the opposition House Leader, who said in the Toronto Star on October 24th that his party is looking into using parliamentary tactics to slow Commons business. This government is all about getting things done for Canadians, cutting taxes, fighting crime, and Mr. Speaker, and bringing back accountability to government. We're delivering on our commitments, and we invite all the opposition parties to cooperate with us.
From Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the Prime Minister will bulldoze anyone not in his little ideological clique. He even shuts down parliamentary committees. Journalists call this attitude ham-fisted bloody-mindedness. And then he complains when he cannot force his unilateral right-wing agenda down Parliament's throat. Well, we all got elected to this place, Mr. Speaker, not just the Conservatives. But look who's filibustering. Only the government itself. When will they stop behaving like petulant bullies?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yesterday at the Environment Committee, for instance, the government was trying to proceed with the important review of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and the opposition instead wanted to move the focus to an opposition private members bill. All about politics, not about results, Mr. Speaker, and that's why the Canadian voters decided to change government on January 23rd. But I want to know, when are the Liberals going to bring back Bill C9 to restore all of the offences they removed from that bill? Why is it that the Liberals, on 8 criminal justice bills before this House, are so uncooperative in producing results to give us the tools to fight?
Honourable member for Regina, Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, this minority Conservative government has no significant parliamentary agenda. But one standing committee, the Justice Committee, is overburdened by a string of ad hoc, one-off proposals designed to cause a logjam. Liberals have a plan to get things moving. Of the 11 justice bills before Parliament today, we will pass 6 of them right now, today. That will save 2 months of parliamentary time and give the Justice Committee room to tackle all the others. Will the government accept this proposal, or is it only interested in justice by fear and slogan?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, we'll pass any government bill, of course, in one day. We need the accord of all the opposition parties. We will not pass Bill C9 today with the Liberal amendments which gutted that bill, Mr. Speaker. He says we have no legislative agenda. We have a bill to amend conditional sentencing for the DNA data bank, to criminalize street racing, to raise the age of protection. We have a payday loan bill, a bill to increase minimum sentencing, a bill to cut judicial compensation increases, and a bill to deal with dangerous offenders, Mr. Speaker, because unlike the Liberals who talked about crime during the election, we're actually acting to fight crime.
The honourable member for Honoré-Mercier.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday all sectors of Quebec society united to ask the federal government to respect Kyoto. The Quebec Minister of the Environment, Claude Béchel, asked once again that the Government of Canada transfer the $328 million promised. Answer, not 1 cent for Quebec. Ontario, however, will receive, and rightly so, $538 million. So that's a double standard. Why a double standard? The Government of Quebec wants to reach its Kyoto objectives. Is that why the government wants to punish it in this way?
Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, it's strange that the Liberal members continue to ask questions about Kyoto when it's their government that signed the Kyoto Agreement, but but continually fail to meet the objectives of Kyoto. They increased greenhouse gas emissions by about 30% when they were in power, Mr. Speaker. We, however, are taking action to deliver concrete results for the environment in the Clean Air Act. The Honourable Member for Honoré-Mercier. That's not action. The government showed that it hated democracy just as much as it hated Kyoto. Yesterday, the Conservative government systematically blocked the work of the Environment Committee, and a little afterwards, the Minister of the Environment said the government would stop its anti-democratic procedures if we agreed to vote in favor of the environmental bill. That's blackmail. That's blackmail. Then that's the weapon of the weak. That's the weapon used by people who have no courage, who have no arguments. This House is in favor of Kyoto. The Canadians are in favor of Kyoto, and the blackmail will change nothing. Mr. Speaker, if the Kyoto Agreement is so important, why did the member and his party, under 13 years of Liberal action, do nothing to deal with greenhouse gas emissions? And the member for Lakeshore said that Kyoto was a total failure when it came to greenhouse gas emissions. However, this government has recently come up with a tangible plan, and we will continue to take action to improve air quality and to improve our environment for the health of all Canadians. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Federal Minister of Finance changed his position yesterday. He said that he will give money to Ontario, as promised under the previous government, to reduce coal-fueled plants. But for Quebec, Quebec is not getting the $328 million it needs to reach its Kyoto objectives. How can the government explain the fact that it's giving nothing to Quebec, which has a greenhouse gas plan, whereas Ontario, which has no plan, will receive $538 million? How can he explain this double standard? The Honourable Mr. Speaker, under our regulatory program for air quality, we work with the provinces, industry, and other stakeholders to come up with national standards to deal with the greenhouse gases and smog right through the country. The environment is a shared jurisdiction, and everyone needs to do its bit. So we gave considerable support to all provinces in the 2006 budget. The public transit receives the $306 million. Mr. Speaker, I would like him to answer my question, so therefore I will repeat my question. The Minister of Environment has said that Quebec's funding is part of the discussions under the fiscal imbalance. Quebec has done a lot to reduce its greenhouse gases and meet Kyoto objectives. Quebec has the will, it has a plan. What's missing is the promised money, the $328 million. Why doesn't he give us the money? Mr. Speaker, the member has just said that money was promised by the Liberals, but there are a lot of Canadians who have a great deal of experience with the empty promises made by the Liberal government. But this government, we made concrete commitments to work with the provinces, with the industry, and with all Canadians to improve air quality, and we will continue along this path with good cooperation from the Government of Quebec, and in particular the Minister of Environment for Quebec, the Honourable Member for Brossard-La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, when the Minister of Environment is downplaying the problem of greenhouse gases, then she says that the Quebec Environment Plan is part of fiscal imbalance. But this is two envelopes. There's an envelope for Kyoto and another one for the fiscal imbalance. Does the Minister intend to give us this $328 million right now? This was promised, and this will enable us to achieve our Kyoto objectives.
Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government of Canada is working with all provinces to deal with climate change and greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. and we look forward to continuing working with Quebec. Actually, the Minister Bouchard has been invited to go, Mr. Speaker, to the next Kyoto Protocol meeting in Kenya, and the Minister has been invited to be part of that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Brussels-La Prairie. The fiscal imbalance is not supposed to be an envelope in which you put everything. The minister is simply trying to shirk responsibilities. Does the government understand that the reality is about the $328 million now it's needed for Kyoto? And the fiscal imbalance, that is another matter, and that's required for the next budget.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is talking about fiscal imbalance, but what we're talking about is the environment for the health of all Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Now, we've well heard from the Environment Commissioner that the previous Liberal government announced $6 billion, spent 1.6. So, Mr. Speaker, obviously there's a lot of broken promises, Mr. Speaker, and a lot of hot air. And, Mr. Speaker, under the former government, Mr. Speaker, they're ridiculing. But, Mr. Speaker, they did absolutely nothing for 13 years. Shame on them.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday in Vancouver, hard-working letter carriers took a courageous stand and refused to deliver anti-gay literature. The so-called literature amounts to a homophobic rant, calling HIV/AIDS a homosexual plague, comparing gays and lesbians to fleas on rats, and blaming homosexuality for the global spread of this devastating disease. Mr. Speaker, will the President of the Treasury Board tell Canada Post that it is totally unacceptable to spread misinformation and hate, and will he ensure that rules are in place to prevent this from happening again?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unaware of the incident to which the member refers, but we'll take the matter under advisement.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Mr. Speaker, I would point out that this was not mail, it was advertising. Canada Post has refused to deliver advertising in the past for a Vancouver store called The Art of Loving. So how can they justify approving advertising that is nothing more than hate against gays and lesbians? This hate mail would never meet the standards of any newspaper, TV or radio station in Canada. Yet Canada Post, I would point out, says that it meets their standards. Why do they have such low standards, and why don't they have a policy against this? So again, I would ask the government, the Parliamentary Secretary, to make it clear that he will instruct Canada Post to bring in rules that will ensure that this kind of hate literature is not distributed through our postal system.
Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously I can't comment on the particulars of a case that I'm not familiar with, but I will say that obviously there are hate crimes laws within the criminal code. And this government will, of course, always fully enforce those laws, and we would encourage provincial attorneys general to do the same. And Mr. Speaker, we would condemn expressions of hatred towards any Canadians for any reasons, without qualification. But as to the particular matter she refers to with respect to Canada Post, I'm sure the Minister will look into it and get back to her.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
It's a bit rich for the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister to talk of slowing parliamentary business. For 2 hours yesterday, the member for Regina Lumsden Lake Centre hijacked the Environment Committee to prevent any discussion of the Kyoto Implementation Bill, which passed second reading in this House. This government is completely ignoring the fact that it is not a majority government and must work with the opposition parties if they want to get anything done. It must also accept that we on this side of the House have a right to study private members' business. Will the Prime Minister accept the will of Parliament and allow the Environment Committee to study the Kyoto Bill without interference from the Prime Minister's office?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a good question, and the Prime Minister and actually this Parliament is making it very clear that we will not permit the opposition to ignore parliamentary rules, and that's exactly what's happened, and that was what the point of order was, Mr. Speaker. That was a breach of parliamentary procedure. It was a point of order, and Mr. Speaker, they need to apologize for what they're doing and trying to obstruct what this government is trying to do. We need to clean up the air that Canadians breathe for the health of all Canadians. So shame on you.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
The decision which was challenged was made by the Conservative chairman of the committee. After hijacking the Environment Committee, the member for Regina Lumsden Lake Centre revealed the true intentions of this minority Conservative government. He described the Kyoto Plan as, and I quote, obsolete and out of date. So, Ah, the true colors are exposed. Yes. So who is making climate change policy in this country? The Environment Minister who claims she supports the Kyoto process, or the member for Regina Lumsden Lake Centre who has exposed the real position of the government, which is to kill Kyoto?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, this coming from a member of a party that announced $6 billion in environmental announcements. Spent 1.6, Mr. Speaker. Got nothing done. Got nothing done. And Mr. Speaker, now they have the audacity to applaud that they did absolutely nothing for 13 years, Mr. Speaker. Shame on them. They owe an apology, Mr. Speaker.
Perhaps the House could keep the standing ovations down to a bare minimum. The Honourable Member for Hull-Elmer.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Transport said in Gatineau that the federal government did not intend, and I quote, to deal with federal municipal affairs or matters that come under provincial jurisdiction. I would imagine that the President of the Treasury Board had not received this order when he decided to interfere with the municipal election in Ottawa by putting an end to the light rail. Does the Minister of Transport, did he actually approve the Minister, by the Director of Treasury Board in this matter?
Mr. Speaker, when this government ran for office, we promised a new era of accountability. We promised to change the way business was done in Ottawa, and we're doing just exactly that. Gone are the days where backroom deals could be made on billion-dollar contracts, only to see huge cost overruns and scandals brought forward by the previous government. Let's hear from what Michael Paulo, a commercial property lawyer, writing in the Ottawa Citizen on October the 16th, said, "This project deserves to be dealt with in the full light of day instead of in secrecy. The lack of a full and honest disclosure leaves me wondering, what else is there we don't know, Mr. Speaker?"
Honourable Member for Hull-Elmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Treasury Board President's interference in this matter is an abuse by a federal minister of his office for political gain. The Transport Minister clearly implied that while it was okay for the Treasury Board President to meddle with this particular file, the federal government won't be messing with other municipalities. Why this particular municipality only? Is it because this is in the Treasury Board President's own writing where he has some personal political vendettas? Why did the Transport Minister, who is the lead minister on this file, allow this political interference?
I'm the President of the Treasury Board.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to my friend from Hull-Elmer, this is the only municipal project anywhere in the country where I've had two former Liberal candidates call me and write me and express a huge concern about this project. Two Liberal candidates have expressed significant concerns to say this project can't be delivered at its cost. Let's look at what the Canadian Taxpayers Federation said, Mr. Speaker. Taxpayers have been misled from the get-go, and it's about time the light rail project got looked at by fresh eyes. This project has been cloaked in secrecy and half-truths for months, Mr. Speaker. We will bring light where there is darkness. We will bring
accountable member from Drummond.
During the Aboriginal Forum that's held in Mr. Ghislain Picard said that he was extremely disappointed by the absence of the Federal Minister of Indian Affairs, when in fact there will be a special workshop on the whole issue of social housing on reserves. This is something that comes exclusively under federal jurisdiction. How can the minister explain the fact that he is not attending this workshop when, according to Chief Picard, more than 10,000 housing units are required in Quebec alone?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development has been involved since the beginning of this conference as a co-sponsor, and in fact we've had a very large contingent of our ministers there, including the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Industry. But it should be pointed out, in fact, that even though this was in fact offered to opposition MPs, including the member from Winnipeg South Centre, Nanaimo, Cowichan, Disney, Mississippi, none of them came. Mr. Speaker, clearly our government has been involved in Quebec, especially in relation to Aboriginal affairs, and will continue to be.
Mr. Speaker, this is just rehashed money. Chief Picard is not impressed by the announcement of $23 million for health, saying that it's simply smoke and mirrors. Instead of cutting back on smoking programs for the Aboriginal people, what is the government waiting for to invest new money in order to improve the health, housing, and hygiene on reserves?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, our government has moved forward with one of the largest investments in the Department of Indian Affairs that we've seen in many years. In fact, we brought forward $300 million in new housing announcements for northern communities, $300 million off-reserve housing as well. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, over the last 13 years, we've seen very little from the previous Liberal government, but thankfully, our new minister is acting with real money and real dollars.
The honourable member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, the grain sector in Quebec is dealing with a terrible income problem. Under the American Farm Bill, grain prices are being kept up. The current income support programs are not working, and there's no vision. In Ontario and Quebec, farmers are producing on both sides of the border to denounce the federal government's policy. When will there be a real flexible income support program that's adapted to their needs? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. We are aware of the problems in Quebec and Ontario. Our programs have given several $1 million to farmers, and we will continue listening to our farmers. Thank you, the honourable member for Richmond. Unfortunately, there are going to be a lot more demonstrations. Quebec received 6.3% of the total envelope from agriculture under 3 programs for income support. The Quebec sector has already met with the agricultural sector, and yesterday the representative said that the minister had nothing new to offer them. Has the government abandoned grain farmers? And if not, when will they show a sign of life and help them? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. Today in Quebec, our producers have already received $137 million. Our government is working to help them, but the Bloc Quebec will never be able to help them and will never be able to create any programs to offer support at all to Quebec farmers.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the Treasury Board President misled the House when he claimed that Derek Burney and Ian Brody had paid their own expenses for a Challenger joyride to Washington. Now, Mr. Speaker, we learn of another joyride by unknown persons to Halifax for an event dedicated to former Conservative Premier John Hamm. Can the President of the Treasury Board tell the House why the Conservative Party is only now reimbursing taxpayers for the flight, and why was the passenger manifest blacked out?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know he was a Minister of the Cabinet, but forget he's forgotten all of the rules. First of all, every 30 to 60 days, there's an automatic disclosure of all Challenger manifests available to anybody at the ATI reading room here in Ottawa. Secondly, when the Prime Minister travels, he obviously has to travel on a secure government aircraft. Thirdly, when he travels for non-government business, it's reimbursed. In this case, it was party-related business. And unlike the Liberals, we didn't bill the taxpayers for that. We reimbursed the government. And when that happens, according to long-standing D&T practice, they sever the manifest. That's D&T's long-standing policy, as it was under the Liberals.
Here, here. The honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, has the government secretly changed Treasury Board guidelines? Is it now possible for members of this House, for example, to pick up the phone, call over to DND and book the Challenger with the assurance the party will pick up the tab? Mr. Speaker, the government needs to account for these breaches, and they need to end these offensive practices now. Will the government release the passenger manifest for this trip so Canadians can know which government members are playing limbo when it comes to meeting any kind of ethical bar?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Liberals lecturing about ethical bars, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you, they spend a little too long at that bar. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister flew to Halifax. He was required to do so according to security regulations on the government aircraft. He went there for reasons other than government business, and that's why the Conservative Party fully reimbursed the taxpayer. D&D, when there's a reimbursement, does not. They exert the manifest, the passenger manifest. All of this information is publicly available. No rules have been changed. All the rules have been followed. And, Mr. Speaker, we're setting an example. It would be nice if the Liberals would acknowledge that.
The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labour yesterday attempted to explain the hiring of his principal political advisor, Normand Forêt. Forêt had received a $24,000 contract for 24 days of work. The Minister even added a point of order yesterday to say that this was a contract signed before the man was hired in his office. So it was all above board. I looked at the website. Normand Forêt Communication got $1,000 a day for 24 days, but he was hired on March 14th, 2006, the 14th of March. It was supposed to be from the 1st to the 26th. So what is the Minister trying to hide here? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing to hide. When the member raised the question yesterday, the Minister of Labour made a commitment to shed light on the subject. He's in Quebec today to make a major announcement. But, Mr. Speaker, I invite the Honourable Member to wait for the Minister to get back next week, and he will give us an update on this. The Honourable Member for Bourassa.
The Minister of Labour yesterday confirmed that his senior policy advisor, Normand Forêt, got a contract for $24,000 for 24 days of work. Quite a bonus. But he said also that Mr. Forêt was hired in his office at the end of the contract. He said that yesterday. And that everything was on the website. Mr. Speaker, when you consult the website, it says that A, Normand Forêt Communication received $1,000 a day between March 7 and March 31st, but that Normand Forêt was hired on March 14, 2006. What was Forêt doing while he was double-dipping?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister did not say what the members just suggested. What the Minister did say is that he will look into this matter, as I understand he is currently doing, and report back to the House as soon as he has all of the information and all the details. And while he's doing so, perhaps the member for Bourassa could tell us what he was doing at the Groupe Everest condo.
The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, today is day 128 of the Liberal Senate's delay tactics. Unelected and unaccountable Liberal senators have taken the teeth out of the Accountability Act through amendments. They have allowed big money to creep back into politics. They have allowed the private interests of the Liberal Party to take precedence over the public interests of Canadians. And they have increased government secrecy by limiting the reach of access to information legislation, which the Conservative Party has opened greatly. Can the President of the Treasury Board tell this House why he thinks the Liberal Party is so afraid of accountability?
President of the Treasury Board.
Not one of the government amendments to the bill in the Senate weakened the bill, but I share the member opposite's disappointment with respect to the actions of the unelected Liberal Senate. They want to increase the role of big money in politics. We want more openness. We want to reduce it. They want to, for the first time in Canadian history, reduce the number of organizations that are covered by access to information. We want to increase the number of organizations which are covered by access to information. What we see, Mr. Speaker, by the actions of the unelected Liberal Senate is that, problematically, the Liberal Party...
Order. The Honourable Member for Sackville Eastern Shore.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about accountability. In October of last year, a letter was written on behalf of the now Prime Minister to Joyce Carter of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, that says, and I quote, "A Conservative government would immediately extend Veterans Independence Program services to the widows of all Second World War and Korean veterans, regardless of time of death." Mr. Speaker, my question is quite simple. When are these widows going to see the VIP extension program?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that the new minister did as soon as he was appointed was to make certain that there was an inquiry done and a review done on comprehensive health care. That's underway as we speak. And while this review is being completed, the government has already allocated an extra $352 million for Veterans Affairs this year, and that last year, more than the Liberals did last year. This new funding includes $250 million, which is for enhanced benefits and services to veterans.
Wow.
The honourable member for Sackville Eastern Shore.
Mr. Speaker, it's a very simple question. Harold Shea of Halifax, an 83-year-old war veteran, died the other day. We lose approximately 24,000 Second World War and Korean veterans every year in this country. And before they die, Mr. Speaker, they want to make sure that their spouses are well taken care of by this government or any government before they pass on. So my question once again, this was a promise by the Prime Minister to a woman in Cape Breton representing thousands of widows in this country, and this being Veterans Week, when will this government honour its promise and extend the VIP program to all widows of all veterans in this country?
The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs.
I don't have to take a backseat to this member or any other member of this House when it comes to veterans issues. I have been fighting strongly for veterans for many, many years. The Minister feels very strongly towards veterans. The Prime Minister has made it very clear how he feels about veterans. We are moving as quickly as we can, and I would ask for the cooperation of the opposition members in putting together a Bill of Rights, in putting together an ombudsman, so that these kinds of issues can be addressed very, very quickly and without delay.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
Mr. Speaker, it is appalling that the federal government is ignoring Canada's homeless. To date, the Minister of Human Resources has refused to indicate if the Supporting Communities Partnership Initiative for the Homeless will be extended. Does the Minister think that if she says it is being reviewed long enough, the homelessness problem will just disappear?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the homeless issue is very important to this government. That's why one of our earliest actions was to renew the Skippy program. $135 million here, Mr. Speaker, and to that in August we made available $37 million more. Now, after 7 years of no changes in that program, we think we must review it, look for opportunities to improve so that we can make it even better and more responsive. And Mr. Speaker, that's $135 million for Skippy, and that's not peanuts.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
We on this side of the House will not accept that the Skippy program is wasteful or inefficient, as she says. Earlier this year, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities told the Finance Committee that Skippy has been particularly effective in combating homelessness and that they asked it be extended for 5 years. Despite a $13 billion surplus, the Conservative government would not extend the Skippy program. There are approximately 150,000 homeless people in Canada every year. Will she stop making excuses and extend the program today?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we've seen with so many programs that were put in place by the previous government, they need to be reviewed. We owe that to Canadian taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, there was a former Liberal minister of CMHC who said that improvements needed to be made. We're going to deliver programs for the homeless at least as good as Skippy, I hope better.
Honourable member for Don Valley East.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government has failed to announce its plan for an estimated 200,000 undocumented workers in Canada, and it refuses to grant them amnesty. Instead of addressing how to use the immigration system to better benefit the Canadian economy, this government is clueless. Will the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration explain why he continues to ignore the plight of these workers? Why is he throwing them out and slamming the door?
Okay. Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, we have tremendous sympathy for anyone who wants to come to Canada for a better life. This is a great country, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I think it's only right that people who want to get here come here legally. We already have 800,000 people waiting in line to come here legally, Mr. Speaker. But the real question is, if the member cares so much for immigrants, why did she vote against $307 million in new settlement funding that we announced in the budget?
The Honourable Member for Don Valley East.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister, his answer shows he's totally clueless, but these workers bolster the Canadian economy. In addition, many of them have children who are Canadian-born and have a legal right to remain in Canada. This is an urgent issue. The Minister has the ability to act on behalf of these families. Will he now recognize the complexity of this issue and ensure that the families of Canadian-born children remain in Canada? Or is he going to throw Canadian citizens out of the country?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the member's newfound interest in undocumented workers. Mr. Speaker, I point out that when the Liberals were on the government side, they deported over 100,000 undocumented people in a very few years. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that, it's time for the former government to owe up to their failure on all kinds of immigration issues, including their failure to provide settlement funding, something we announced in the budget. Mr. Speaker, they froze settlement funding and penalized immigrants. We provided $307 million in new funding because we care about newcomers, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, despite the measures put in place last May by the government to help abused immigrant women, Amnesty International still deplores the working conditions of domestic workers that's often close to slavery. In 2003, the UN adopted a convention to protect migrant workers. What is Canada waiting for to sign this convention?
Mr. Speaker, we have great concern for migrant workers, workers of all kinds. We have rules in place regarding labor conditions, and we work with the provinces to ensure that those standards are met, Mr. Speaker. And whenever that is in question, Mr. Speaker, I urge, of course, the provinces to move very quickly to address these issues. And I point out, by the way, that Quebec is a leader in ensuring that labor standards are met when it comes to migrant workers.
Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. The newspapers tell us that the Conservative government does not intend to regularize illegal immigrant workers who work in construction, notably throughout Canada. This decision is incomprehensible since there is a great need for workers in this sector. Will the government recognize that one of the methods it could use to reduce abuse of these workers is to regularize these workers so they won't be in a clandestine situation? The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Appreciate the question from my friend. This is an important issue, and I do have tremendous sympathy for people who want to come to Canada. We're looking for ways to make it easier for tradespeople and people who don't necessarily have a university degree to come here. In fact, we've raised the number of temporary workers who come here quite dramatically, Mr. Speaker. We're going to do more on that file. But, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to allow people to jump the queue, get ahead of the 800,000 people who are trying to come here by regular means. That's not the Canadian way, Mr. Speaker. We have to be fair to people who are trying to get here legally.
Honourable Member for St. Boniface. Mr. Speaker, on September 26th, the President of Treasury Board said in this chamber that the Court Challenges program was a waste of money. Does he consider Gisèle Lalonde's efforts to save Montfort Hospital to be a waste, the efforts of the Franco-Manitoban Association to have its rights respected and have its own school administrations, which is a right it never had? The Communauté francophone acadienne announced that it is going to federal court to invalidate the government's decision to cancel the program. Isn't the real waste having to pay lawyers to defend this odious decision before the courts? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we found out about the worries about official language minority communities recently. Since this is a matter before the courts, it would be inappropriate for us to comment on this case. But never forget that this government continues to support wholeheartedly the francophonie and the official languages of this country.
The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable members of the Liberals and NDP say they're so concerned about Aboriginal communities, so I wonder, why didn't they go to Mash-to-Eash? Now, the Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs, he even offered to pay for the opposition MPs to go to the forum. But they didn't show up, Mr. Speaker. Shame on them. I wonder, could the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs give us the real facts on how Canada's new government is contributing and improving to the quality of life of all Aboriginal communities?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the excellent question. Mr. Speaker, of course, contrary to the opposition, the Minister of Indian Affairs, along with the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Labour and Economic Development, as well as other members of our Quebec caucus, were in fact there and will continue to be present for Aboriginal people in Quebec. At the forum, the Minister announced $3.8 million for the University of Quebec, nearly $750,000 for First Nations Education Council, as well as Health Canada put aside $16.2 million. Mr. Speaker, I could go on. But the point is, Canada's new government is there, and the opposition isn't.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Halloween's coming, and my kids are working on their costumes. My kids, at least, won't follow the example of the former Liberal government and create phantom jobs for themselves. The Public Service Commission has alerted this Conservative government to the blurring of the line between public service and politics, citing the creation of jobs that do not exist. It is time to seal the cracks. More than 100 bureaucrats who over the past 11 years worked as ministerial aides have slithered back into the bureaucracy. Will the minister confirm no current ministerial staff will do the same?
I'm the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague from Ottawa Centre for the question. I can certainly tell him that no current Conservative ministerial staffers can do this, but I cannot tell him that former Liberal staffers are still not entitled to this right. And the reason why is this privileged political access of Liberal elites to sneak inside our nonpartisan bureaucracy is still on the statute books today. We want to get rid of it. We want to ban that practice in the Federal Accountability Act. But, Mr. Speaker, while the Liberal Senate, the unelected Liberal Senate dithers, this practice unfortunately still goes on.
For Ottawa Centre.
I wish I could be confident in that this will not happen again. There still is two-way traffic, and this is exactly the conditions that spawned the sponsorship scandal, yet this government has not acted on this specific issue, Mr. Speaker. The public service must be apolitical. Staff cannot shift into and out of political jobs. Public servants moving to ministers' staff must resign first. They must follow the same rules as rank-and-file public servants. Will the government commit to gap this obvious gapping hole loophole that still presently exists and will not change with the present legislation?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're certainly prepared to look at that. I'm told, unfortunately, it doesn't fall within the scope of the Federal Accountability Act. It was this Liberal scandal was just brought to our attention. What we learned, Mr. Speaker, is that after Justice Gormley completed his work, after Mr. Ouellette, Mr. Dingwall, and Mr. Galliano were fired, after Canadian people had relieved the Liberals from power, they took one last attempt to politicize our bureaucracy and help create phantom jobs that didn't exist. This experience has been vilified by the Honourable Member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, it is galling to most Canadians that despite being awash in money, this mean-spirited minority government has axed $17 million in funding to help people who want to learn how to read and write. In an astonishing display of ignorance, the Senate Leader of the government, the Prime Minister's confidant, recently said, quote, "This is not an issue that is receiving much attention from people out there." Have any of the government members or senators bothered to meet their constituents and read their correspondence? Is this another case of the government members ignoring what they don't like and acting in short-sighted ignorance?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, when Canadians elected us, they wanted a change from the old Liberal government. They wanted a government who is going to be accountable for how well their tax dollars were spent, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've identified programs that just weren't meeting the needs of the literacy groups, the programs that weren't helping to reduce the illiteracy across this country. That's why we're refocusing our energies, refocusing our dollars to help improve the literacy situation while respecting taxpayers' money.
The honourable member for Edmonton Sherwood Park.
Mr. Speaker, one of our 5 election priorities was to get tough on crime. Following through on our promise, our Justice Minister has brought forward a number of bills to toughen up Canada's anti-crime legislation. Can the Government House Leader please update the House on what he is doing to move forward on this important aspect of the Government's agenda?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
He's trying. Mr. Speaker, one of the things we made clear to Canadians in the last election is that we wanted to get tough on those individuals who commit serious crime. And this is why the Justice Minister has introduced 11 pieces of legislation.
Wow.
11 pieces of legislation. Now, on Tuesday, the official opposition indicated that they were preparing to slow down all government business.
Incredible.
By Thursday, they said they're prepared to pass 6 justice pieces of legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever I can speculate how this conversion came about, but I put together a draft motion, Mr. Speaker, that we want the input, of course, from the other 2 political parties here, but I'll be returning to the House and see if everybody will make good on these promises. This is an opportunity, Mr. Chairman, for this House to work together and make this minority promise.
The honourable member for Trinity Spadina.
Speaker, undocumented workers and their families live in fear today because the Minister of Immigration has failed to act. It seems the Minister has 3 choices. He could follow the Liberal lead, and just turn a blind eye to the exploitation of these workers. He could order a massive witch hunt and deport all of 200,000 hardworking tax-paying people, or he could just do his job and find a solution. Mr. Speaker, what is the Minister planning to do?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my friend for her question. The fact is that we are working hard to find some solutions for all newcomers, Mr. Speaker. Canada is a great country. Lots of people want to come here. But, Mr. Speaker, we can't turn a blind eye to the fact that these people are here illegally. That's what we can't turn a blind eye to, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are fair. They want people to come here, but they also want them to play by the rules. So we're going to find a way, Mr. Speaker, for everyone to get here who has all kinds of skills, because we need that, Mr. Speaker, but they're going to come here legally.
The Honourable Member for Jeanne Lebert. Mr. Speaker, the sortation plant near Lachine Canal will be sold to the private sector for close to $25 million. Local elected officials, the CSN, the Mayor of Montreal, and others are more or less in favor of the project that had been developed by people in the community. Hundreds of people demonstrated in favor of the project. Only the Conservative government seems indifferent to it. When will the Minister of Transport intervene in favor of this project? It's time to act. No more excuses.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, this land was actually offered to Canada Lands in a first right of refusal, and Canada Lands did not take the offer that they had available to them, and as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, it has been offered to the highest bidder, and that sale is apparently going to go through, Mr. Speaker.
Order. This brings